Thank you. Thank you. First of all, let's see if it's no. Ah, it is. Okay. All right. Well, welcome and thank you for coming. I've got a lot of slides. We may or may not be able to get through all of them, and but we'll get through as many as we can, certainly. So the title is kind of important here: Advantages of Machine Learning with Multi-Attribute Seismic Surveys. It's long, but let's approach this backwards. Let's start off back here. Multi-attribute seismic surveys. Okay, multi-attribute seismic surveys. And what we're going to be going over this afternoon for a little bit here is the concept of a 3D seismic survey, which, when it's prepared for interpretation, it's three-component data, right? It's by line, trace, and then either time or depth is your third axis. So it's an image cube that you deal with for seismic interpretation. So we're going to be dealing with interpretation, and multi-attribute seismic survey is not just one 3D survey. Now, multi-attribute means is that we're going to be dealing with however many attributes for every seismic sample that you have. And that's what we're going to be going over. Now, advantages of machine learning, that's the second part. If we just had multiple attributes, well, goodness sakes, you can look at multiple attributes. You can look at them one at a time. And if we wanted to color them up, we might color them up some way. And so you have X, Y, Z, you have a three-dimensional image, and using color potentially would give you 4. And so you could use color using a pair of attributes, right? You could go from a blue to one attribute to a green of the other attribute, something like that. But if you've got more than 2 attributes, pretty soon you're in 5-dimensional space, 6-dimensional space, 7, 8, 10. We have run as many as 50-dimensional space, all with the seismic attributes. So what we're going to be going over here is using machine learning for analyzing seismic attributes, because it's in a dimension we can't deal with directly as human beings. However, don't give up on that. The machine learning works quite well in the higher dimensions because it's looking for concentrations of information. And no, it isn't just random. You might have heard the expression garbage in, garbage out. Well, that's still true, right? If you've got 8 dimensions, 8 attributes, if it's 8 dimensions of garbage, there's no natural clustering at all. It's all just random garbage. It's junk, right? So you're not going to have anything really to work with. So all this stuff about machine learning is not going to save you from crappy data. That's the point. All right, so let's take a look here and at our first slide. Machine learning and seismic interpretation. Now, we can look at interpretation in a variety of different ways, and we have machine learning here. Is machine learning of any value for the oil and gas business? That's what we're interested in. Well, is it just a fad for our business of oil and gas? No, it's not just a fad. It's here to stay, and we will be using tools. Today, we're just learning how to use the tools, but 5 years from now, you come back on campus, you'll find courses that are being taught, and they will be using machine learning on a regular basis to help them analyze seismic data. Seismic data is the 3D data cube, of course, for the seismic reflection data, but also the gravity and magnetics, also the wireline information that we have with boreholes and all that, and how that stuff is all integrated. So no, it's not just a fad. And IR4, what is that? IR4 is the Industrial Revolution number 4. You see, this stuff is so profound, so profoundly different from what was done, say, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, that it really is an industrial revolution, and call it 4 if you want to. But what makes this so special? Well, if you think about the beginning of digital computers, there was actually a step before that. And the step before that was the fact of being able to transmit information with no error. And how are we able to do that? It goes back to a guy by the name of Shannon. It goes back many, many years ago. And the whole concept was that if you have binary information, you can transmit binary information with no error, perfect resolution. So if I'm sending some information from me to Laura over there, I can send it with perfect fidelity using binary information. I'll send a block of data, And attached to that block of data is going to be some check bits, which are going to check the validity of that binary piece of information. And if it gets sent over there and it is not consistent with the data that it received, well, send it back again. So that's really the first step. The second step is the fundamental concept of having volatile memory. And in that volatile memory, you not only have the data, that's obviously where you're going to put your stuff, but you can also put the computer information for processing. That's your algorithm, of course. So those two, and that's really a fundamental breakthrough, being able to put data and your algorithms in volatile memory. And then the third part here is that after all the processing that we've done since, what, probably 1950s or so, all that stuff now today, now that what makes this the new revolution is the fact that this information now is being approached with machine learning. And in machine learning, the algorithm itself is self-adapting to the data. You got that? And that's really what makes this such a fundamental change in our thinking. Machine learning is self-adaptation to the data itself. Ordinary just data processing with an algorithm and a chunk of data is just like a factory. You bring the stuff in, you munch on it, you chew on each one, and you spit out some result. That's been around for a long time. That's what Professor Stewart and I grew up on. Okay, but it's new now, so we've got a new thing. All right, the applications for machine learning are in acquisition, seismic acquisition. The Internet of Things is big there. Doing some work in that area as well. Data processing, there's plenty of areas there. There was a workshop just recently over in San Antonio, a lot of processing papers and things like that at the workshop. And in interpretation, that's what we enjoy. We're working on the interpretation. So if you take a look over here on the right, you see low-hanging fruit and you see challenging fruit. And this is the balance of how are you going to apply this new kind of thinking, this new thing, in terms of the low-hanging fruit. Well, the low-hanging fruit is automating drudgery. The way we used to have to pick velocity functions and things like that, try to figure out all of that, and we have to do all that manually. And so you take a shot, and then you would analyze the records, and then you would look at the data, and then you make processing decisions, and then you go on to the next step. All that was done manually. And of course, typical data processing flow, there might be 7 or 8 processing steps. So somebody's got to look at that and make decisions after every single one. So the low-hanging fruit here is automating the drudgery. Not all of it. I mean, you keep the people where they should be, and that is analyzing the results. The other part here is the challenging fruit. The other side of the equation is discovering something new. And that's what we like. That's what we get off on. That's what we truly enjoy. We're not so much interested in trying to automate drudgery. We're interested in discovering new things. Now, there's basically supervised and unsupervised machine learning. And there are applications in image processing, as we were talking about just a minute ago. And multi-attribute seismic machine learning is what I'd like to talk about this afternoon a little bit. Now, there's deep learning, which you may have heard about. And deep learning is used in several different fields. TensorFlow is a common starting point for the deep learning. And applying that to the seismic data for interpretation purposes, there's a lot of drudgery involved in that. So deep learning is making some inroads in trying to automatically build blocks of geology based upon blocks of seismic response. And you can see there is using, for example, a patch-based classification scheme in deep learning in TensorFlow right there. That could be used, and that was used in this case of training on only 3 lines, and it annotated, I believe we have 8 facies over here. So the training line was this, and this is an example of the classification results. Okay? Now it takes a lot of time, a lot of numerical calculations for the training to be accomplished, but nevertheless the process works and works quite well. Again, to remove the drudgery. The next step in terms of thinking about deep learning is this whole concept of autoencoders. And you may have actually heard that terminology for autoencoders. And what that is that if you think about this classification process where you treat this information as images, and you are reducing the dimensionality of that information. You're trying to identify the essence of the truly distinct different properties of that data, and that's a dimensionality reduction. Well, what I just showed you a minute ago, that CNN was an example of ending up with classification. Autoencoder is to take that concept, and this is an encoder process, whereas the first part was a decoder process. The encoder process takes it back up to the original dimension, and it's certainly much more robust than just telling you the difference between salt and non-salt. Using an encoder-decoder segmentation process would be, I suspect, a little bit of an overkill. Now, this is used on training on 30 lines throughout the 3D data set, and after that training is done, then hit the button and let the neural network process the whole network, analyze all of the data. And you can see some of the results over here. The classification results were on a line, and then this is the up here, and then these are some examples of the different gross lithologies of these boundaries. Here's an example in 3D. This is some public data from New Zealand, and this is an example of how you truly are after it's trained on those 30 lines in this case. Then going back and just training the whole cube, and now we see the results. But what are you looking at? What are you looking at? What you're looking at then is literally every sample somewhere. You know, you've got that line number, cross line number, and then you have the time sample number or depth sample number. That particular point has a classification associated. This is with this class. What's that? That's a low coherence footprint is this blue. That's the first Facies number, and then this is the 8th one. So this was number 1 in green. Okay, see this one stacked down here? Okay, that's probably this one right here. And chaotic, that's probably this one up here. Are you with me? The whole process of the machine learning is classifying. Classification. And that's how we burn through a whole bunch of data in a hurry, because we have a fully trained neural network, in this case using deep learning, but that's not the only one around, and classifying the whole 3D data cube. Now, what we have at the end, well, what do we have at the end? We have every sample, it's got a classification number. So all of this is classification number 1. All of this, chaotic, down here is classification number 7. You see the concept of geobodies? I mean, once you've got this thing classified, you could say, well, how many samples of chaotic class do we have? How many do we have? Are they all connected or are they separated? Well, if they're separated, how many are they? And what's the distribution of the sizes? You get the idea of geobodies? The whole thing is not, the whole purpose of this is not just to look at pretty pictures and say, well, this is low coherency and that's good stuff. You're not done. You're just starting. And that's the whole point here. You're just starting. Because once you have identified each of these geobodies by their classification, that's the start of a whole bunch of really interesting and fun stuff, trying to sort out, well, what was the depositional environment? What is causing this reflection pattern for each of these? Okay, so it's, here's another example. This is deep learning for fault identification. And in this case, it is just a classical CNN. And these are the results. This is comparing the results of this. These are the detected faults in cross-section and in time slice down here. Comparing that with the standard coherence over here on the right. And these are some of the fault surfaces that were detected by this process. Again, deep learning, but set up a little bit differently because the problem's different. Now, if you learn anything at all on this little presentation, just remember one thing and one thing only. What's the dog and what's the tail of the dog? Okay? What's the dog and what's the tail of the dog? The dog is the geology. The tail of the dog is the geophysics. And the machine learning and whatever else we're going to do. Never forget, what's the dog and what's the tail? Because when you want to apply any of this numerical work, it's not just to look at pretty classifications and stuff like that. The dog is, what's the geology going on here? Where are the anomalies in that geobody? Where is it changing? Where does it die out? And why? That's the dog. And that's where we're really going in all of this stuff. Okay? Now, that was your tease. Okay? Now we're going to step back, and now we need to sort of look at things in the big picture. So we're going to take our airplane and so go from about 1,000-foot elevation here, or altitude. Now we're going to go up to about 50,000 feet. And we want to compare two things, blender thinking and classifier thinking. Because Rob and I, we studied all about auto pickers and how to make beautiful maps of horizons and fault surfaces and the relationships between the two, so the big structural pictures and stuff like that. And that's all examples of blender thinking, where you have smooth, continuous reflection horizons. And that's what you're looking for. That's your bread and butter to help you build the very first thing that you need to try to figure out. What's the very first thing you want to try to figure out? Hello, it's the geology. What kind of geology? The structural picture. If you don't have the structural picture in mind, all the little subtle changes and stuff like that isn't going to be of any value at all. Okay? Got to get the first picture first. So we're interested in horizons. We're not throwing those away. Not at all. But that's blender thinking, and that's what the old geezers like Rob and I, that's what we were. This is our bread and butter thinking. Okay, so to do that, we're doing smooth interpolation of the seismic data and also the rock properties. Smooth interpolators and stuff like that. And the red, green, blue blending is used for visualization, sometimes for visualization. And certainly the eye, you know, you have an affinity. Any of you have an affinity. Your eye is a lot closer to the eye of an eagle than the eye of a dog. Did you know that? Eye of an eagle. Now, what is it? Well, in particular, in exploration geophysics or exploration geology, we are very good at spotting little stuff that's just out of the way. Something's not quite right. This little area over here. Well, that's just like your eagle that's flying at 1,000 feet, and the mouse moves, and a blade of grass bends, and oh my gosh, let's keep an eye on that spot. That's our seismic anomaly. Okay? But you can only appreciate the seismic anomaly in the context of the smooth, continuous thing. Okay? Because we don't find oil and gas for conventional exploration purposes. We don't find it everywhere. We find it in specific locations. And even if you're working unconventionally, you say to yourself, well, I'd like to try to minimize the cost of doing business here, so we're looking for sweet spots in terms of where we're going to put our unconventional wells. So this is all examples of blender stuff. The classification is a whole fundamentally different mindset. And the mindset for that is that we're looking for natural clusters of information, that the data is compartmentalized into natural clusters of information. And that information are the seismic samples that are due to geobodies, and those are the things that we're mapping now. We're mapping the interfaces between geobodies and also the discrete geobodies. And this whole way of thinking now is thinking about two sides of a fence. Maybe you think about that as a barbed wire fence. If this is a little difficult for you, I think about it's really an easy fence to do. What I'm talking about here is that sometimes you want to define what is the continuous smooth part, and sometimes you want to identify what is on the other side of the fence, which are your anomalies. And with machine learning, here's the cool stuff. With machine learning, you can control where that breakover is between the continuous part and the anomalous part. Because when you get to the anomalous part, that's what your eagle eye is going to want to focus on. Okay? That's where we're going. So, unfortunately, we're not really suited for that. The eye likes smooth stuff, but it dislikes discrete solutions. So, having little blocks of color and stuff like that, we'd much rather look at smooth changes in color. Okay, so I want to compare something here with you. Here's an example of blenders and classifiers. And this is small 2D data. Anybody from Pakistan, by any chance? Anybody? Well, I'm going to butcher the name of this formation. I think it's Chorgali, the Chorgali Formation. And these are depth contours. You can see that we have a little structural high right here, and there's a fault coming through here, and This was all put together with a whole lot of creation, a whole lot of imagination on a series of 2D lines. Here's a strike line, and here are some dip lines. Okay, and all this was put together, and here's where they drilled. Okay, so I want to compare that with the basic sort of processing and thinking that was done for interpretation back in the old days with what's being done today. And these are the geobodies using machine learning classification. And this is the sort of thing that we have now. But now we're looking at every individual seismic sample now has been classified. And that's a fundamental difference. And there are two faults here. There's one fault here, one fault there. There's a graben here, and then there's a funny anomalous thing that goes in the middle. And geologically, we'd ask ourselves, hey, what the heck is that? That's what we're interested in. So these four 2D lines required a lot of imagination. And what do we have today? Well, today we're looking for hydrocarbons which depend upon geology, right? Just don't happen anywhere. I mean, physics is the driver. In terms of geophysics, what's the dog and what's the tail? Well, the dog is a physical principle, so we have to know something about the wave equation before we can understand whether the machine learning is going to do any good or not, right? So we're not really replacing anything here, as we're augmenting using higher dimensionality machine learning technology, but fundamentally we're trying to apply this using ordinary seismic waves, which of course depends upon the original dog, which is the geology. So what we have here is machine learning is used to help us get through the grunt work. That's the purpose. So here we have some classification. This is a self-organizing map classification. And here's this funny thing. This is the anomaly. Blue right here, but guess what? That some anomaly was only one classification, and yet what we have here is really two distinct parts. This part out here on the tip is different from the rest of it. So you can have more than one geobody, geologic geobody, which gets classified the same. So the whole purpose here is not just classification. The whole purpose here is trying to get us to our geobodies. This is a blow-up of that funny little anomaly. The top part, in this case, is colored green. Bottom part is colored white. But the reason for blowing all this up, these are all in space, right? So what you're looking at is a space picture, and every single one of these little chiclets is a seismic sample that's been classified. And in fact, this is this common classification, but then breaking out the geobodies, this upper part broke out in one geobody, and this broke out in another geobody. All right, I thought it was kind of important here just to take a short little time to kind of review the terminology, because I suspect that that's not all that common to what you're familiar with. So let's take a look at the two terms here, supervised machine learning and unsupervised machine learning. Supervised machine learning simply means is that we have a training set of data, and in other words, if we have 8 lithologies, 8 facies, we're going to have 8 buckets of example data. Okay? That's supervised learning. So we're taking known answered data, and then we're running it through the machine learning stuff to identify what are the classifications for the results. Now, if we have good buckets of very clean examples of each of these 8 cases, we'll probably get good results. But if they're dirty in any way, well, there's some ambiguity there, which is going to lead to some difficulties. Unsupervised machine learning is just the opposite situation. And you might say, well, okay, unsupervised machine learning, that sounds like it's better because it adapts to the characteristics of the training data. So whatever training data you've got, well, hit the button and good luck. Kiss and prayer, we hope it does some good. Well, then you look at the results and you say to yourself, well, I'm not sure I don't really know what I'm looking at. And that's the problem. That's the big issue with unsupervised machine learning. Okay, another one, self-organizing map, SOM. That is technology for unsupervised machine learning, SOM. And we also have the winning neurons, which you're going to see some examples here in a little bit. Those are the neurons after the training process. Multi-attribute seismic sample is the fundamental unit that we end up classifying. Now, it may be amplitude or some other attributes that we're using. Maybe 2 or 3 attributes, 5 or 8 or 20. As I said, I'll leave you just as many as 50. And then the multi-attribute 3D surveys would be your collection of whichever attributes you decided to use. Okay. Now, obviously, you have to calculate those ahead of time, but that's not part of the machine learning stuff. The machine learning stuff is trying to identify where is the information in attribute space. And so what's really key for this new style of interpretation is the attribute selection list. You know, and in terms of interpreting your seismic data, we not only have to keep track of all our standard stuff like bin spacing and sample intervals and all that other stuff, but now we also need to keep track of, well, which attributes are we having? If we're going to look at some results of maybe some machine learning, what were the attributes that were used on that? Is that really appropriate for the question, the geologic question? That's the important thing here. Okay, so multi-attribute seismic interpretation is at every seismic sample now, rather than a single value of like amplitude, now we have a vector. If we got 5 attributes, it's a 5-component vector. That's easy enough to understand. We're going to use neural networks and machine learning to try to sort all this out and then figure all this stuff out. And it is not something that has to do with reflection wavelets. That's scary, because if you study the conventional thinning of a bed layer, and eventually you get to tuning thickness where the amplitudes build up to the maximum amount, you continue to thin, and the amplitude starts to fall off. Well, all this multi-attribute business is not limited by the reflection wavelet. Yeah, it has its own issues and stuff like that, and it's not perfect, but your way of thinking about that is that every seismic sample is different. And if you think about an ordinary reflection, depending upon which attributes you use, some of those attribute changes, like phase changes, there will be a change of every wrap of 360 degrees, and there are also phase changes associated with phase discontinuities and things like that. That happens like that, geologically and geophysically. That's at a boundary. So using combinations of attributes takes us into a whole new area of investigation. It's not conventional seismic facies, and this is the scary part, it doesn't even require calibration to the wells. And I'll show you some examples. So what we have here, there's a number of different areas of places that we can apply this for. And, you know, we're still learning. As an industry, we're still learning how to use all this stuff. So think about this. We have our Earth, and from the Earth we have a 3D seismic reflection survey. And after we process it, we have an image of the Earth, okay? So we have our 3D reflection surveys, and then we have our attributes, the attribute selection list. And now what we have then is our data in attribute space up here. If you have decided for a particular geologic question that you need 5 attributes, and you've picked out which ones you want, now it's a 5-dimensional space, and all the seismic data that you had down here, at every seismic sample in this reflection survey, every sample now has 5 numbers associated with it. If you said there's 5 attributes, there's 5 numbers for every sample. So that's like 5 times the size of a 3D survey. Every point then exists in attribute space. The process of machine learning is to analyze this information in attribute space, looking for centers of concentrations of natural clusters of information and identifying where they are in attribute space, and then the results are take us back into a model of the Earth, which fundamentally depends upon the geology, but it also depends upon which attributes. So you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, as the old example goes. And if you're looking for faults, you don't use attributes that are really there for continuous things. Okay? It's all a combination. So the big picture here is that the attribute selection list is like an illumination function. It's like a flashlight. And you're using those attributes as an illumination function to identify geology. That's what we're looking for. Geologic geobodies in attribute space. That's what it's all about. And then the natural clusters that are identified in attribute space, they're concentrations of samples in attribute space. And we're using machine learning to identify where they are, and that's the basis on which we do our classifications. We're not interested so much in the natural clusters. Big deal. Who cares about that? We're interested in our estimates of the geobodies. That's really the fundamental thing that we're interested in. So, in a nutshell, here is this unsupervised neural network stuff. This is an example of how it operates, and we're using only 2 attributes in this case. With 2 attributes, at least you can put this down on a piece of paper and you can watch the machine learning stuff actually operate. So what we have here is some seismic traces, and what we have is we're plotting this information with only the amplitude and the Hilbert transform. So that's 2 dimensions, of course. And these pluses are the data samples as they exist in attribute space. That's our data. Now, all the blue lines here, the little circles here, those are the neurons. During the training process, they all started at 0 here, and they all wandered out. Many of them stayed close to 0 right here, and some of them wandered out to cover this part of attribute space. So these samples out here are associated with that winning neuron. And that's the dimensionality reduction that we're talking about here in terms of analyzing our seismic data. The bottom line is these neurons travel around in attribute space during the learning process. Every time they take a step to make some motion, if you will, that constitutes an epoch. So one pass through all the data samples amounts to 1 epoch. And we might go through 50, 100 epochs to finally watch these neurons finally slow down and stop. So they move towards their final locations by a series of training epochs. Now I've zoomed in to the core around 0, 0 right here a little bit. And the pluses are the samples themselves, and the little hex symbols right here are the locations of the winning neuron. Because the other little part about this is that if that's where the winning neuron ended up, if that's the color of the winning neuron right here, these are the samples that shows associated with that neuron. Okay, this is the classification of each of these. And notice that there's one out here, 229. That's also associated with this winning neuron, but look at the distance. So what we have here, those that are close, well, this classification was a good classification, but those that are far out, those are still anomalous. Yeah, they've been classified, but because of the large distance, large error, in other words, those are the anomalies. And that's really the important thing here. Each winning neuron defines a natural cluster, but the samples in that natural cluster, some of them are going to be good and some of them are not. Okay, those that are nearby, they fit real well. Good goodness of fit. Those that are far away, poor goodness of fit. So these are the low probability neurons. The low probabilities associated with each of the data samples associated to the winning neuron. And these are 2 different winning neurons in this 2-dimensional map. Okay. The next thing about unsupervised machine learning is now if we take a single seismic trace, in this case we have a synthetic seismogram with 4 basic reflections. We got a positive peak reflection corresponding to this. We have a thin bed response right here. This is trough over peak, so this is low acoustic impedance thin bed, high acoustic impedance thin bed. And then, whereas this one is a positive reflection going from low acoustic impedance to high, this is from high acoustic impedance to low, and then we get a symmetric trough event. So there are 4 basic interpretation wavelets of these, the basic 4 right there. And you can see the results here for low signal noise ratio, medium signal noise ratio, and a little bit higher signal noise ratio. Okay? And now let's take a look at those. Now we have not just one seismic trace, but now we've got 100 of them, and we're going to look at the results in attribute space, using only 2 attributes so we can kind of see what's going on. With the low signal noise ratio, the neurons have moved around. Most of them were right in here, but we have neurons that are also associated with these samples. And the high signal noise ratio, or low noise level, means that there's perhaps 100 numbers, 100 pluses sitting one on top of the other. And when we start to have a little bit more noise, medium noise level, and average signal noise ratio, now rather than a single plus sample here is, now we have a distribution. And higher level of noise, now you can see that we have more things that look like natural clusters of information, higher noise. Okay, so because of that, then, we can then track this information, and with these winning neurons and the vector samples, we're then able to classify the results. And this is the classification of the data using this SOM two-dimensional color map. And that over there on the right is a zoom in of the core, and you can get a sense then of what these natural clusters are like and what are the classifications of the natural clusters and how they break down. So the natural clusters are classified by this SOM neural network. And what happens if you start off with maybe one seismic trace and then you have more, you add some more, and pretty soon what happens is when you get more data, this natural cluster right here was because we had more data in that locality and attribute space, whereas here it's a little bit thinner, and here it's even a little bit thinner. So it is related to, the natural cluster is related to how many times does that portion of attribute space get hammered on. It's stacking. We are stacking in attribute space is all we're doing. And as good high-powered geophysicists, we'd say, we know stacking. And the reason for this to even work at all, this whole concept of natural clusters means that it's stacking in attribute space, and we're letting the machine learning go after to try to find those things. Okay. This is a stacking process in attribute space. And what we have here is that in this case right here, we've got more samples, which means better definition, as opposed to more samples, less samples right here and less definition. Okay? If we go to a classical tuning thickness, tuning model, a wedge model, tuning thickness is right about in here. That's maximum buildup of amplitude. Symmetric peak event, symmetric trough event. We're just varying in a 1D sense. We're varying the thickness from the thick bed response here. The amplitude builds up as we get constructive interference because the reflection coefficients are opposite right here. So our maximum buildup of amplitude is about this point, and continuing thinning, then the amplitude falls off. Now we've got that over here, low, medium, and higher noise, and this is a blow up of the effect. And this these little arrows right here show you tuning thickness. So once we get to tuning thickness, the amplitude falls off. The middle and the bottom here, what's that? Well, now we do a SOM analysis, and for this illustration, we're only using two attributes: the real trace and the Hilbert transform. And we're doing our classification, and we'll have, in this case, using this color map right here, we've got 64 neurons, and here's the blow-up. And although you can see, without a bunch of attributes, what you have here is the buildup of amplitude and fall off. Here, we're starting to resolve and being able to track, anyway, track things far below tuning. And to help get over your optical bias, and you use smooth colors like that, it's real easy to say, oh, I see smooth things going on here. So let's also look at it using a random set of colors to sort of kill that concept in your eye of tracking smooth things. And here's a random color map. Haven't changed the data, we're just changing the color. And you can still see that even below tuning, we're able to track same classification below tuning. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because for reservoir characterization, trying to understand compartmentalization of the geology in discrete geobodies, trying to understand fluid contacts and things like that. So this is Gulf of Mexico. And what we have over here is a cross line running through this, pretty much through the well A2 right here. The discovery well, A1 was up there. We have time contours, but we also have the colors. The color is the amplitude. So this is the highest amplitude, classical bright spot, shallow water, Gulf of Mexico effect. And you can see over here on the right here, you can see not only, well, you can see this edge right here. And one of the first things we'd like to sort out is, well, where's the edge of the reservoir? And here is using a SOM analysis. In this case, it's a 5 by 5. And we have some results here which much more clearly identify where the edge of the amplitude is. That helps us to establish the edge. But also, this choice of attributes has helped us And one of those neurons has nailed the oil over water contact, and this one over here is gas over oil. And so those neurons are, there's a number 15 right there. And here it is, the same thing, but we just turn off all the other stuff. So you're just looking at these three neurons, 25, 20, and 15. And you can look at the effect. It's not magic. There's no magic here. What we're doing is we're using attributes. And there are some attributes which are phase discontinuities, and there are others that are smoothly varying things. Now, if we just use phase discontinuity, we'd have a blizzard of glitches. We wouldn't be able to sort things out. So the proper or way of picking your attributes is really an important thing. So this new machine learning, using simultaneous multi-attributes, is resolving reservoir properties on a much finer detail than we've ever had before. And this is being used all over the world now, frankly. And we'll show you some case histories. The geobodies within these reservoirs are revealing some detail now, which are right down on the sample level, which we can count now, and we can tie that with the reservoir production. Because now we have much more accurate volumetrics that we would not have looking up here, just looking at the amplitude alone. And there's nothing wrong with the amplitude. All this stuff is just not magic. Oh, yeah, there's nothing up my sleeve. There's nothing magic about anything that I'm discussing this afternoon. We're just using machine learning, and we're using the stacking process in attribute space for helping us understand a little bit deeper about what's going on. So there is an evolving new level of style of doing seismic interpretation using machine learning. And this is the sort of classical layout. Basically, the very first question is, at 50,000 feet, where am I in the world? What am I interpreting here in the world? And are we picking through the garbage, or are we looking at a brand new exploration area that's never been looked at before? And then we go to the next question is do we have any wells in this area? And are they under lease? Can we actually go out there and do some more drilling, or do we have to wait? And then are we looking at the geology of a particular formation or geologic age, or are we dealing with channel systems? You know, there's all sorts of things that we need to ask on a more level. Now, what's happening then at that point is to then start to use the geology to think about what would be the appropriate attribute selection list that's appropriate for the questions that we would want to ask. There's no golden arrow for any of this stuff. The geology is in control of what our attributes are that we're going to be looking at. Are we looking at type 2 AVOs, things like that. And then we work out the geobodies, what is the neuron topology size, things like that. And then after we're done here, we calculate, using those natural clusters, we calculate and identify geobodies. And are we done? Well, guess what? The process was starting with the multi-attributes, and then the natural clusters, and the machine learning gives us geobodies. We look at geobodies. But it's just, remember that illumination function? It's not perfect. You're not going to see any perfect geology. Nobody's going to come up and smack you on the side of your head and say, here's the fault, and here's where I need to drill. No, but it gets us closer to helping us identify the geology. Okay, so the geobodies are very important, and the next thing that we need to add to this stuff is what is going to be our iterative process of analyzing this. And so what we will do then is we'll have to go back. You never run this stuff just once. You might be running it 20 times, maybe 10 times. I know our friend Deborah Saker, she runs them. She just finished up a little project in Colombia, and she had 50 of these. And every step, she's getting a little closer to zeroing in on solving a particular geologic question that she's working on. And then, of course, the result of that is the interpretation. So, if you get the idea here, what's important, what's the dog, and what's the tail here in the geophysical part of things is, what's the geobodies? And we're going to ask our favorite geologist. Do we have a favorite geologist out here? Anybody care to claim to be the favorite geologist in the department? I didn't think anybody would be that brave. Should we ask a stratigrapher, what's a geobody? A geophysicist? Should we ask the janitor? Should we ask the APG? Should we look at Sheriff's book? Where should we go to find out what is a geobody? Well, you know, everybody's going to have a different answer on that, but I'm going to define it in one of two ways. And that is that we'll take the result of the machine learning, and we're going to auto-pick those things. In that process of auto-picking, the results of the sum, those are delivering to us simple geobodies. Now, it may turn out this auto-picking, but now we're not auto-picking a seismic reflection horizon. It's not looking for a common wavelet until it hits the fault. Then we got to look up or down. No. What we're doing here is that we are auto-picking a classification that has some closure to it. It's three-dimensional. And we keep going and find how big it is and where it is, that sort of thing. So these are all simple geobodies, which are the next level of auto-picking, but using machine learning. And then after that, it's you know, you got it out of the washer, now you're ready to throw it in the dryer, right? And throwing it in the dryer means basically we got to do a little interpretation here, because some of this stuff is garbage, and some of maybe it's got some geology in it, but we need to we're dealing with signal-to-noise ratio here. Nothing's perfect, so we'll need to do a little interpretation on this process, and that's the second part. All right, so let's go straight to a couple of examples, and then I'm done. This one was probably one of the best surveys that we've ever had ourselves. Now, we have a number of clients that are using this kind of stuff, but they're not talking about it, and that's fine. But this is an Eagleford study. Here is the Buddha, which is a strong peak in the area, and here's the Chalk, another peak. We go from one peak, trough, doublet peak, trough. Okay, everything we're interested in here is between that peak and that peak right there. That's less than 100 milliseconds, okay? So we're only going to analyze the data in a 100 millisecond window, but this is a fairly large survey, and fortunately we've got good well control. We've got vertical wells, and we've got some horizontals as well. The Eagleford shale objective is 14 milliseconds thick in this area, about 100 feet thick. The Eagleford group, about 28 milliseconds, 260 feet thick. That's what we know from the geology, okay, from these wells. The influence of the Eagleford is about 350 feet. That's what we're dealing with here. And you could see in the SOM results. A lot of detail there. Now, every little chiclet here corresponds to a seismic sample that's been classified. And so that yellow corresponds to this one right up here. The blue corresponds to maybe that one over there. You with me? Okay? Hanging in there. All right, so what we have then is that this analysis that was done with a colleague of mine, Patricia Santagrossi, started to analyze this data, and because she had good well control and because she had some X-ray diffraction, things like that, she was able to calibrate what the unsupervised neural network stuff was going with the well information. And this is kind of the astonishing part. This is the vertical bore right here, vertical well, and then this one is the horizontal well, and she was able to track then when she was going into the sweet spot and when she was going out of the sweet spot. But to get to that point, each of these corresponds to particular portions of the lithofacies, the wireline logs over here on the right. And it was known that at this well right here, the high resistivity zone is corresponding to the best production, and that is, you can see, 372 MBOE. Okay? A very, very good well. One of the best in this 200 square mile 3D survey. Now, this whole analysis was not done around one well. This whole analysis was done over the whole 200 square mile survey and then compared with the result of the well. And the astonishing thing was that, okay, so I got a green here, and it corresponds to the sweet spot at this well too. Guess what? It was also corresponding, that green was corresponding to the sweet spot over here on another well, quite a distance away. This is about 15 miles by 15 miles. How could that be? Well, fortunately, we had very good well correlation information there, plus X-ray diffraction to tell exactly what was the good stuff. She spent a lot of time on this, okay, because she was having so much fun, and actually ended up, was able to develop a whole Wheeler diagram for this 200 square mile, actually about 210 square mile 3D survey. And in the Oshachak at the top and the Buddha at the bottom, these were the gradational changes, the geologic changes within the survey. So this is the whole Wheeler diagram that she put together by analyzing the machine learning results. And the basal clay shale was associated, which was found in the wells, was associated with 3 neurons. The Eagle Ford marl were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Nobody's going to hand this stuff to you. This is no automation, but this is careful analysis of the machine learning results. So 7 neurons she identified manually, found those identified with the marl, and the rest of it we have up here associated with the rest. So there were a total of 16 Eagleford shales, and there were 10 classes right there. And this is 41,526 seismic samples that were identified in this. And that's with the 16 neurons. So these results, Tricia's working on publishing a paper on this, carrying this all the way from unsupervised neural networks all the way through to some good geology, which was basically consistent with the latest work, but there was some extra twists which she identified as a result of this study. So what we're looking at here is auto-picked geobodies. There were auto-tracked, auto-picked across a 210 square mile survey, and it was the basis of revising the depositional history of the Eagleford group in this area, certainly. And, of course, now, if you're going to go out and do some drilling, these are the sweet spot neurons. 60 to the northwest, 59 to the southeast, and the best ones were right in here, 58, 57, 50. And I think there are a total of 10 wells in here. And yes, part of the answer is the high recidivity zone, but that's not all the results. And here is an example of one of these geobodies, and what we're looking at here is those sweet spot neurons in a 3-dimensional display. You can see some of the wells did pretty good. This one towed out in the wrong spot, didn't hit the sweet spot. That's a bad one. And of course this one is good, and this one is not quite as good, but it's still in it. And all these tied together with the production that was coming out. And there was no constraint. These seismic results were not constrained by any of the production information. There was no supervised learning going on at all. This is all unsupervised learning, and then just tied in with what they had encountered in the well. Okay. This next example I want to show you here. This is technology is used in PMEX, and this is an example. Now remember, we went over this business about blenders and classifiers. So it isn't like this stuff versus inversion. That's not right. No, you can use this on instantaneous attributes. You can use it on inversion attributes. You can use it on any kind of data that you like, whatever floats your boat, okay? Because this works in attribute space, whatever your choices are, that's fine. And in this area in Mexico somewhere, don't know where, this is comparison using instantaneous attributes and inversion attributes. And I think there were 4 inversion attributes. This stuff was just published just recently, and there's a very nice paper on this for you to take a look at. Interestingly enough, the results are consistent, but they're not 100% consistent. And indeed, in this particular case, the better answer was using these attributes, instantaneous, as opposed to using the inversion attributes. Not making a blanket statement about instantaneous is always better than inversion attributes. Not saying that at all. There's plenty of good research here to tack this down a little bit better. Here's another example. This is down at 10,000. Yeah. This is 2.5 seconds, 2.7, 2.8. I think we're around a depth of 10,000. Yeah, here we go. There's 6 feet of pay perforations at 10,800 feet. And that is this point right here. And what you're looking at then is well, we'll not spend too much time on this, but there was a 6 foot of pay here, 4 foot of pay there, and those tracked to neurons that were able to be tracked laterally. And it turned out in this analysis that there was a bar at this depth, and the production area, this is the original well for the reservoir, and this discovery well, where this was on the other side, here's 400, almost 500 feet outside the production area, so that constituted a whole new field, okay, and a new analysis. So this IP'd at 250 barrels of oil a day and 1.1 mm CFG, 4 feet and 6 feet. Now you may say, I don't believe it, I don't care what you say, this is just malarkey. Okay, that's great. The evidence is how it's being used. And like any new technology, it certainly can be misused. Here's an example of some public data. This is the offshore New Zealand Great South Basin. And what you're looking at here is using both the supervised neural network and the unsupervised. The deep learning in this case was a CNN fault attribute calculation in black, and then some classification to classify what we have. And the power of that is for every block here, you're now starting to see details within that block which are simply not available using the amplitude data alone. And that's very powerful stuff. About a year ago, let's see, February 2018, a little bit more than a year ago now, and I had a bunch of people, and we asked them what they thought all this stuff could be used for. I'm just going to read you these categories. It looks like it's going to show stratigraphic details. Okay. It's going to reveal direct hydrocarbon indicators. I'll show you an example of that. We use it for calculating volumes and map view areas of the reservoirs. Better definition of the reservoirs. Identifying thin beds. Isolating faults and fracture trends. Unconventional resource plays and deep water plays. So this is maybe about, what, 50 or so people? Yeah. Question, thank you. I'm ready to take a breath. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so this is for machine learning on or for unsupervised learning only?
I showed you a little of both. The first part of the presentation was supervised machine learning using deep learning processes. And they were training in 2 types of training. The first thing that I showed you was training on different seismic lithofacies, where we had training samples. Second thing I showed you, training on the faults. Those are both supervised. And then everything, for the most part of this, was unsupervised.
So I'm asking about the voting. The voting was for the unsupervised and supervised?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Because once we have it classified, whether it comes from supervised or unsupervised, hey, you can still make geobodies out of it, right? There's something magic there. So here's what I would hope you take away from this. Don't forget the dog. Geology is the dog, and geophysics is the tail. And we have here seismic interpretation using machine learning is not going to go away. But we're using multi-attribute seismic surveys, and it is being used successfully all around the world. Right now, we know of ourselves, Gulf of Thailand, certainly different parts in Mexico, the United States, both onshore, offshore, North Sea, and the Middle East. Some other areas this stuff is being used. But here's the fun stuff. And the fun thing is that these geobodies can be analyzed, and you can interpret these things for reservoir characteristics as well as seismic stratigraphy. And the point here is that this is plenty of fertile ground. Fertile ground for using this new technology. If you want to be the first in your block to use machine learning, this is good stuff. The second thing is learning how to use it effectively and appropriately. That's the first thing. That's as a user. of this new technology. And the other thing is there's plenty of open research questions, a lot of wonderful research questions. And of course, every good research question, once it gets understood and analyzed, then that sort of leads us on to the next levels and stuff like that. So that's really what I wanted to talk about. So, but Paradise, there's nothing magic about this. It's an evolving platform of geoscience tools for seismic interpretation. That's the bottom line. It's evolving. It's not perfect. You know, you're going to have to work at it a little bit to use this kind of stuff. But the whole concept is not SOM. The whole concept is it's a workbench of machine learning tools, which uses CNN, autoencoders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All this stuff using these new set of tools. So the workbench includes components to develop new machine learning, but also if you wanted to write Python script, for example, new algorithms, stuff like that, knock yourself out because that's also part of the package. And there's a scripting language called Paradise Scripting Language, which is our numerical entrance under the hood, and you will have access to be able to use that. There is the language itself, the editor, and then the interactive commands that are used to operate this. And there's also an e-learning course. It's really 16 hours. Oops, sorry. And until the end of the month, it's only 99 smackaroos. So yes, I know that's a little bit more than a couple of 6 packs of beer, but we're talking about your future here, right? So you might consider this, and if you become certified, this is a certified version. If you don't have the 99 bucks, it's okay. Because you can go to the GSH website and you can get it for free. In fact, I bet some of you have already gone through it, stuff like that. And that's all good stuff. But if you want certification, we offer it available on our website. Any more questions? And thank you so much. Yeah?
How to detect the reliability of the results? So, for example, the machine learning and supervised machine learning showed a pattern passing through the wells. Mm-hmm. This pattern could be changed if I change the scale of the measurements.
Absolutely.
Say, if, for example, I choose the scale of measurements of the analysis 10 milliseconds, it will be changed if 20 milliseconds.
Absolutely.
Also, if according to the number of neurons.
Absolutely. That's something else we need to make decisions on. That's part of the interpretation process. Absolutely. Yeah. Now we have some theoretical limits on how big is your neural network stuff. I've done some work in that area, and something like 7,000 or 8,000 neurons. Once you get beyond that, then you got redundant results for seismic data now.
So how can I detect the reliability of this pattern is right or another pattern is right? How
to identify which is the right answer?
The reliability of the results.
Yeah. There are some wonderful evolving, not perfect, but evolving statistical tools. Akake's information criteria is commonly used to compare these results numerically, statistically. Also, this paper, the PMEX paper, has some interesting things in it. If you've gotten involved in the statistical parameters, they use multivariate classifications to help sort out which is the good part and which is the bad part, and whisker plots and things like that. And it's not perfect. It's area for growth. It's area of research.
When doing your clustering, do you always keep the coordinates of your voxels as in one attribute?
Yes. The samples are fixed. They never move. What moves around are the neurons in attribute space. And actually, this is also true of deep learning, by the way, although you can't really track it. But when you get done, you will have the same result anyway, because the results that you have, your classifications, if you got 8 or 10 or 15 classifications, they will be located in attribute space. It's trivial when you have only one attribute. If the only thing that you're using is amplitude, well, then it's just 15 different amplitudes.
My question is, do you use the coordinate as one attribute?
No.
So if you shuffle your volume, shuffle off your voxels,
yes,
your classification won't change, is that right?
We intentionally randomize the training order.
Okay.
Now, that's very important because we don't want to bias our results in any way during the epochs, during the training process. So we randomize our selection of the attributes. The selection of our samples during the training process.
For geometric attribute analysis, I spent some time generating different geometric attributes, trying to figure out which one would give me good image for the pulse for a plastic reservoir system.
All right.
And I selected some attributes based on the visual observation that I did in the attributes and in the seismic data. But then when I tried to plug in all these selected attributes based on my experience with the area, and spending more than 2 months analyzing the data, and then run PCA, I was expecting a specific attributes to be in the top, like the energy ratio similarity, which is coherence, and it was multi-spectral coherence too.
Okay.
But when I run the PCA, I was surprised to find the energy ratio in the bottom, and some other attributes are in the top.
Are more important.
Yeah, so I'm trying to figure out, does the PCA hold some geology, or mostly statistical, and other attributes has ranges close to each other? That's why I found the energy ratio in the bottom.
You got some unexpected results.
Yes.
And I find that very satisfying. I find that very happy, because that challenges you to figure out, well, why are we getting these results the way we are? Maybe there's a bug in the algorithm, but probably not.
I don't know.
Okay, so there's got to be an explanation to try to understand this. Here's what I know about PCA. In the work in industry of using this type of technology, PCA is an assistant to help us choose the right set of attributes. For example, if you're working in carbonates, like the PMEX people are dealing with carbonates all the time, and so they're using geometric attributes a lot. And sort of a basic rule is not to combine geometric attributes as a group with instantaneous attributes. We don't understand yet why, but it seems like when you mix different groups, you end up with something that's hard to understand.
In my case, it was all geometric.
Okay, good. All right. All
the
geometric.
one that I selected.
And here's what I know about PCA. Okay, the whole idea there is it's a linear process of looking at the correlation between all possible pairs of the attributes of the data that has been selected. Okay? Now, if the data that you select goes from 0 to 6 seconds, you're asking quite a lot, because the things that do correlate, that's a lot of geology. And you're probably looking at the statistical properties of those particular attributes about what correlates with what. If instead you had a particular pair of horizons that you're doing this analysis on, am I getting closer? Okay, I like that too, because all geometric attributes, and now a horizon that you're interested in. Now we're selecting data that's getting us closer to the geology. But what I know about the linear process of PCA is that just the fact, well, what it measures is independence. Are two attributes independent of each other, or are they not? 0 to 1. If they're dependent, or if they're independent, okay? That's all there is about it. There's nothing more complicated than that. And the fact that that you find that some attributes are correlating with others that are correlating, what does that really tell you? It tells you, if it's a number close to 1, it tells you that they're quite independent or dependent. If they correlate, it's a value close to 1. So what does that tell you? There's not much new information there. If they were perfectly, if you put in amplitude twice, they're going to perfectly correlate, right? And that doesn't tell you much. Now there are some physics-oriented geophysicists who will say, I'm sorry, the only thing I'm interested in is all my data better be orthogonal. So I want everything to be perfectly independent of everything else, because that's the perfect information. Those are not going to correlate at all. Correlation goes to 0 because they're 90 degrees to each other. Okay? If you got a strong amplitude here, you've got a 0 processing on the other one. Okay? What we have discovered on our own, and you may or may not agree, and that's fine. That's what this is all about. In situations like that, we find that adding more attributes of the similar type is going to require some playing around with. You'll have to take a look at the different principal components, the ones that appear to be grouping well with you, that appear to be grouping, and those that don't appear to be grouping. The classical approach is to take whatever you got in terms of the correlations, and once you get to say the sum of your eigenvalues is say 80 or 90%, anything above that is just garbage. It's just noise. There's no new information. So the fact that you're correlating, that is showing you information or not showing you information, frankly. So I don't think that it's a straightforward analysis. But remember, this is the principal component part. Yeah, Rob.
Thank you, Andy. This is great. We appreciate all the support you've given us. So that's thank you very much.
Yep.
I was just wondering about your Eagleford Shale example.
Yeah.
You got an unsupervised classification, which was very telling, and then you've gone back and interpreted that in terms of the logs and the geology. Do you ever, in this case or others, do you then take the geology, run the forward problem, model it, look at the attributes, and try to close the loop to see what has the unsupervised assessment? Okay, so again, you've got the geology, run the forward problem, check all the attributes, see how that matches, and maybe do an inverse problem on your classification.
Well, exactly right. No, we ourselves have not. Doing the forward problem is the minimization problem, and then doing the inversion part is to carry it back, and I think that would be a wonderful thing to analyze, but no, we have not done it ourselves. Like I say, there's plenty of fertile ground here for a lot of things that can be done. Thank you. Yep.
Very interesting talk. I have a question. You showed a lot of the analysis on the seismic images.
Mm-hmm.
So apparently that depends on how good quality the seismic image is. So still, one person did the imaging, give you an image, and then you selected several attributes and run your machine learning, and you got a classification. Then another guy improved the model and did another image. So do you still use the same set of attributes, or you have to adapt?
That's a wonderful question, and that ties right back to your questions back here. And that is there any way we can statistically discriminate? Which is, by the way, every time you run that song, you're making a new statistical model. There's nothing magic about it. So we need to understand statistically to compare those different models. And we need to try to understand, well, if we have basic processing or we have an enhanced processing, we've done some spectral whitening, is that really buying us anything or not? That's an interesting question that needs to be answered. And then your choice of attributes. You know, it's just like anything scientific. Best thing to do is vary only one thing. If you're going to compare standard processing and spectral whitening process, keep all your attributes the same and run your SOMs twice and then look at the results. So vary only one thing only whenever you're doing some comparisons. And then your comparison is probably going to be a statistical comparison of those two. And I urge you to take a look at that PMEX paper because they've got some very nice statistical tools that are being developed and that sort of thing. Thank you. Is that about it?
I guess Dylan, forgive